Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Capes, and I'm the Coordinator of Appraisal Systems for Bay District Schools. This training is going to be for teachers who are new to Bay District Schools, who are new to teaching, or who would just like an overview of the 2019-2020 evaluation system. Now, throughout this particular video, there are going to be opportunities for think time and discussion, and I do encourage you to pause the video. I will pause for a few moments on the video, but you should probably pause the video in order to have some think time or discussion. Please make sure that you have the handouts that are listed there to the right, and if you need to pause in order to go find them, they're available on the Bay District Schools intranet. And when you go to the intranet, you're going to find the tab that says Administrator and Instructional Evaluation, and the information is available to you there. So let's get started. So the purpose of this evaluation is to provide you an overview of the evaluation process and a deeper dive into aspects of each portion of the evaluation. Your administrator and myself are here to help you through each stage as it comes up, because we're going to be going over this, basically this timeline of information, and this is a whole year. So I don't want you to get to the end of this video and go, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. Don't worry, we're going to chunk this out, each thing that we go through, and you're going to do one piece at a time. And all of these fine people that are here, your administrator at your school is here to help you. I'm here to help you get down to this last due date down here and feel like your evaluation has been completed in a manner that you feel comfortable with, that you understand how the ratings were derived, and that you feel that it's been done with fidelity, because we all want everybody to be successful, and it's a team effort. I have my part to play, your administrator has their part to play, and you have your part to play as well. And it's going to take all of us to ensure that we get down here and our goals are accomplished. Now, I do like to make sure that I take a moment and remind everybody that evaluations are required. It is not something that Dawn Capes just decided would be a great thing for us to do. It is in state statute, and it is further defined in state board rule. And our evaluation manuals are reviewed yearly by the Department of Education to ensure compliance. So, for example, if you are new to teaching, you are new to Bay District Schools, or you have what is called a break in your service, you have a break in your contract, then you are required by law to have two evaluations. We call that a formative and summative evaluation. So today we are going to be going over the three components of the evaluation. This is in the formative and summative. It's your instructional practice, the deliberate practice, and student performance. And I'm going to be going over a little bit of the timeline of things that may be coming up at this particular time when you are viewing. Even if you are a new hire to Bay District Schools after the school year has started, the things I'm going to be talking about that you need to do first are things you need to do first, no matter when you're hired. So let's go over the instructional practice. So we do use the Charlotte Danielson Framework for Teaching rubric, and we use the rubrics that are from the first and second edition. So very early on in her research-based product of a common vocabulary for instructional practice. So the first thing I want you to find is you have a paper that's called the placemat, and it provides you a snapshot of the components, and it looks a little like this. So when you take a look at this, you'll notice that there are 4 domains. That's the first part of our vocabulary that we want you to be aware of. There are 4 domains, and these domains shouldn't sound strange or unusual. There's planning and preparation, classroom environment, instruction, and professional responsibilities. So when you take a look at this, you'll notice that it's on the paper like it's a cycle, because none of these are one and done. You don't plan and prepare one time and you're finished. You don't attend to the classroom environment of your school, of your classroom, one time and you're done. You don't teach the kids one time and they get it. And you don't have professional responsibilities one time and then you forget about them. All of this is a cycle. It is ongoing every day, every week, every month, every year. Now, one of the things that Charlotte Danielson does say is that there is an on-stage aspect to our instructional practice and an off-stage, and you can't have one without the other. So in order for you to have a good on-stage experience for you and for your students, there is off-stage work that goes on as well. And the more off-stage that you do, the better your on-stage is going to be. So let's take a look at the placemat. So when you look at the placemat, you'll notice that there are 22 total components. Those are the ones with 1A, 1B, 1C, etc. Underneath that are 76 elements, and those elements are the sub-bullets, and they further define the components. Now, these are the full 22 that are in the Charlotte Danielson framework for teaching, but we don't evaluate on all of those anymore. We used to, and we decided that was way too much feedback for people to receive. It's just a lot. So the Oversight Committee, a number of years ago, decided we needed to have a conversation about what things are most important to Bay District schools for us to gather evidence on and to provide feedback back to teachers and administrators. And we decided, as you'll notice, the underlined items are the items we landed on. And you'll see that they come predominantly from Domain 1 and Domain 3. So that's planning and preparation and instruction. Does this mean the other 11 are not important? No. But as we get into and as you experience the rubric, you're going to see that it's very symbiotic. For instance, you cannot have good classroom instruction without good classroom environment. So it really does build on one another. So we decided that when we needed to give people feedback, we needed to hone our discussions around Domain 1 and Domain 3, but this does not mean that the other 11 are not important. So this would be a good opportunity to pause, because what you're going to do is I'd like for you to take a moment at each of the, take a look at each of the 4 examples that are listed and look at your domain sheet and decide for number 1, is it an example of domain 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then do the same thing for each of the other 4. So take a moment to discuss or to think about it if you're on your own. So when you took a moment to discuss, you'll notice that number 1 is predominantly Domain 2. Well, why is it Domain 2? Because when you look about it, the teacher in number 1 is talking about Domain 2 because he's really attending to the behavior of the students, right? And it's about that environment. All the teacher needed to do was go quietly, ask for it. So that's the environment of the classroom, that this is how I'm going to attend to misbehavior. So for number 2, it is Domain 1, and there's a keyword in there. He's planning for instruction. So in that case, this would be Domain 1. Number 3, which is about the students taking responsibility for annotating about their homework. This is one of those where it starts to get into 2 of the components. Well, how was that? It's professional responsibilities, because we do have the students are taking responsibility for part of the record keeping, but it's also communicating with families, and the students are taking an active role in that. And that's going to be important when we think about that highly effective column in just a few moments. Number 4 is going to be Domain 3, because in this particular example, it is about the instruction of students that is occurring. So you'll notice none of these are unusual or strange. These are all things that teachers do every single day. It gives us now, though, a common vocabulary, and it starts with the domains that we have, 4 domains. So let's get a little deeper. What you're going to need now is the rubric. Now, while you're finding your rubric, it is a good time to notice that for the purposes of this video, I am using the Framework for Teaching, the Classroom Teacher rubric. If you're a school counselor, or you are a media specialist, or you're a resource teacher, you are going to have a different rubric. But the process that we're going to discuss and the intent behind the rubric is going to be very similar. All right, so let's take a look at the rubric. So when you look at the rubric, here's what I'd like for you to do. I'd like for you to spend a few moments familiarizing yourself with how it's set up. And here are the 2 questions for you to be thoughtful about. How is the rubric similar to the placemat? And how is it different? So take a moment to chat amongst yourselves, or to have some personal think time if you're watching this by yourself. So you probably noticed that the rubric is similar to the placemat in that it has 4 domains. Those are still listed. You have the components, and you might have even noticed that it's similar because you can kind of see those elements as you look through the rubric. How is it different? Well, you are going to see, for example, that you have definitions of how those actions are going to be where they land in the rubric. Okay, so that's going to be how it's different. It gives us more information about the rating that would go along with different actions. So now I want you to do is I want you to find 3B. You're going to find 3B specifically, and I want you to look at the 4 areas that are a part of 3B. So read for me from unsatisfactory to highly effective. Now that you've had a moment to read the highly effective, unsatisfactory to highly effective, think for a moment about the keywords that illustrate how highly effective differs from effective. So talk about that for just a moment. Now, when you look at it, you'll notice, because people are always afraid that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be unsatisfactory. Well, let's look at unsatisfactory. Let's see what kinds of actions would define an unsatisfactory rating. Notice that the questions are low level or inappropriate. I want you to think about that. There's something that's inappropriate about the question. It could be developmentally inappropriate. It could just be in general inappropriate. When you think about unsatisfactory, I almost want you to see that as a malpractice that's occurring with students. It's something that is going to be inappropriate, that it's going to let's use the word harm them in some way. It's either going to lead them down a totally wrong path. It's not going to help with their learning. There's something harmful to students. Now, I'm not talking about physical harm in this case, but in this way, it's something that's not going to enable their education. That's unsatisfactory, in this case, questioning. Needs improvement in this case, I want you to hone in on this part. That most of the questions are low level, posed in rapid succession. They're just lots of questions are being thrown around. So you'll notice here we're starting to get into this thought, well, it's not about quantity of questions, it's about quality of questions. So now let's take a look at highly effective to effective. You probably noticed in highly effective, we've got high expectations. There are cultural and developmentally appropriate questions. So we're really thinking about what students can answer as a part of their developmental, where they are developmentally, and students are formulating those questions. So they're not all coming from the teacher. So in effective, you do see it's a very teacher-centered, teacher-based classroom. This is an effective classroom. It is a good classroom. To really bump it up to highly effective, you have ongoing and systematic opportunities for students to be leaders in the classroom. And in this particular example of 3B, they are formulating the questions themselves. They are coming up with them. So that's going to be a bit about what you're going to notice as you look up through highly effective on your rubric. You'll see, for example, in, let's look at 3C. If you look at engaging students in learning, you'll notice in highly effective there you have a portion about students. Students are assisting and making sure that assignments are appropriate. Like somehow in your particular classroom, you are asking students for their input and for their ideas about how work should progress, or where the direction of the lesson should go. It's like you're attending to them and letting them have some stake in it. Just remember, you're the adult in the room and you're the leader. Okay, it's not, ollie ollie oxen free for the kids. So you'll notice throughout highly effective, there are opportunities for students to take leadership roles in the classroom. Let's go a little further. So in 3B, questioning and discussion techniques, remember there are 3 elements that go along with questioning and discussion, and they are quality of questions, discussion techniques, and student participation. So let's look at effective. Most of the teacher's questions elicit a thoughtful response. The teacher allows sufficient time for students to answer. All students participate in the discussion with the teacher stepping aside when appropriate. Okay, so let's look at those a little bit more. This would be a great moment to pause. What are types of questions that might elicit a thoughtful response? You might have discussed that types of thoughtful response questions are going to be those higher order questions, those questions that are open-ended, those questions that have more than one answer, those questions that encourage students to go back to text to put together their answer from different parts of the text, or questions that encourage them to analyze and synthesize information from multiple texts. So we have lots of opportunities for questions that elicit a thoughtful response from students. So again, I want you to remember here we're talking about quality of questions, not quantity of questions, because needs improvement is rapid fire questions where students are not really given given an opportunity to think about the questions or engage with the teacher or the content because the questions are flying at them so fast. So planning and preparation is where a lot of your questions live. Now, certainly there are questions that are going to happen in the moment as you really build on and you build the instruction, but those really thoughtful questions have to be planned and prepared for. We have limited time with our kids each day. Sometimes I know it feels like a little bit more than that, but in reality, we want to make sure that we plan and prepare so that our questions are thoughtful because we want to take best advantage of the time that we have for them. A great place for this occur is going to be with your PLCs. And let's everybody work together. Many hands make light work, and PLCs can plan and prepare questions that will elicit a thoughtful response, and or you can use resources already available to you. So for example, those K-8 teachers who are teaching with the new curriculum, you know that there are questions throughout that both spiral within the lesson, spiral within units, and spiral across the course of the year. So you are already have access to excellent questions. If you are teaching secondary math, you also have access to question stems that you can use. If you are using any of the Canvas courses through social studies, there are also higher order questions in there that you can be sure that you are highlighting and using with students, as well as if you are one of our elementary science teachers, there are also question prompts in each of the units that you can use for your students. So there are multiple opportunities for people who may be new to a subject or new to a school district, our school district, new to teaching, in order to get those really high quality questions to elicit those thoughtful responses. So how long is sufficient time for students to answer a question, one of these thoughtful questions? How long is that? Take a moment to pause. So you might have a lot of different reasons for sufficient time. It could be a developmental. It could be based on what kind of question you're asking. If it's a right there kind of question versus a synthesis question. It could be anywhere from a turn and talk to a neighbor to a question that might take, an entire class period or 45 minutes for students to really grapple with the kind of question that you're asking them. So it's going to depend. But here are some things I'd like for you to also consider around this. Wait time 1. Wait time 1 is a minimum of 3 to 5 seconds to give students a chance to recall information. Remember we talked about needs improvement has rapid fire questions? Well, slow down and give the students time to think about it because research has shown that that has a positive effect on the quality of their responses and therefore on student learning. Now here's one I didn't know about before I knew about this research is wait time 2. That's after a student responds and before a teacher or another student reacts. And a minimum of 3 to 5 seconds there is optimal, again, to affect the quality of the student learning and on their response and therefore on their learning. Now, my personal favorite, I just count to 10. It's easy, I count slow, it gives me an opportunity. In my experience, 10 seconds is usually enough time for people to go, oh wow, she really wants an answer from one of us. So that kind of encourages that environment. And speaking of environment, remember I talked about how these things begin to be symbiotic? This is an example of that because while I'm waiting 10 seconds for the students in my classroom to think about it and for somebody to respond, there's some training that has to go along with that, isn't there? That I'm not pausing because I forgot what we're doing. I'm pausing because I want you to think. I'm pausing. And so, no, what you're not going to do is I don't want you to turn to your neighbor and start talking about what's going on next class period or tomorrow or this weekend or what happened yesterday. I'm giving you think time. So there's some environmental things that have to occur in order for there to be this culture where questions are asked and how we answer. So that goes along then to how could a teacher help ensure that all students participate in the discussion? I know we have those hand raisers, and occasionally they have the right answer, and sometimes they have an answer and it may not be right, and it goes entirely the way we didn't want to go. How can a teacher ensure all students participate? Take a moment to discuss. So, I wonder what you came up with. How can a teacher ensure all students participate in the discussion? Here are just a few. Turn and talk, so easy. Kagan strategies like hands up, pair up. Whiteboards where students have to record their answers, exit slips, a carousel, Socratic seminars, accountable talk, even ways where you track responses. Some people do this the old fashioned way with literal popsicle sticks, and I think there's an app called Popsicle Sticks. I think Dojo does these randomizers where you can call on students at will. So this gives opportunities for all students to participate. But look at what the culture it builds. This goes back to the culture in the classroom, doesn't it? Because now we have to have this culture where we're going to take risk. And I'm not just going to call on one person. It's important for all of my students to actively listen, to show respectful responses, to be positive and support one another when we have right answers or maybe when we have wrong answers, and how we give feedback and guidance to one another. So remember how I talked about how they really go together? In order for you to be able to have an opportunity for all students to participate in the discussion, there has to be an environment in the classroom where the students understand, okay, my teacher is not going to call on the one student, little Sally in the front, who always raises her hand. That my teacher, Sally, understands, okay, I can't always raise my hand. And then everybody else understands I'm responsible for my learning too. So all students participate in the discussion. And notice in 3B, for effective, it's all students participate in the discussion. All of them for effective. Okay? So let's take a look at the next one. What do you think it means when the teacher steps aside when appropriate? So in effective, the teacher steps aside when appropriate. Take a second to discuss. So what does it mean the teacher steps aside when appropriate? Maybe you discussed the difference of these kinds of classrooms. So we do have the age-old sage on the stage versus the guide on the side. But here's what Charlotte Danielson tells us. Whoever is doing the talking is the one doing the learning. And if at the end of the day, you are always the most exhausted and you are the one always with laryngitis because you are always guiding the learning from the center of the room, take an opportunity to build in chances for your students to be as tired as you are, for them to have opportunities to lead conversations, for them to know how to be responsible for their own learning. But again, that takes time and training in order for students to understand that when we're over here working in a group, this is what we're doing and here are our expectations. It's not going to happen if students just are kind of randomly left to do that. It does take time and training, but the important part of it goes back to student learning. Because whoever's doing the talking, and of course talking about the content at hand, is the one that's actually doing the learning. So again, this rubric is not anything new or unusual. It is a common language for us to talk about our instructional practice so that when we are talking about using questioning and discussion techniques, we're talking about those three aspects of the questions. What kinds of questions are we asking? How are we encouraging students to respond to it? And how are we stepping aside when appropriate? So all of those portions of it, it gives us something to talk about. Then it's not my opinion. opinion about good questions? Well, it's about what the rubric says. These are the kinds of questions that I heard. Where does it land on the rubric? So that last rubric, that last bullet, it gives us a systematic process for collecting evidence around our practice. Let's talk about that for a second. So administrators are taught to gather evidence, and evidence focuses what is seen and what is heard in the classroom, or evidence that is collected, and it's based on this common language. There's no guessing. It's, this is what I saw, this is what I heard. Now let's look at this and let's decide, okay, I heard a lot of rapid fire questions. That's developing. Let's talk about how we can improve that and make it more effective for student learning. Okay, and again, that's not my opinion, that's the facts. Here's what I heard, here's what I saw, here's what the students did, here's what you did, and that's observational data. So there are going to be two opportunities for observation cycles. So the first one is the formative, and the formative has a pre-conference, an observation, and a post-conference, and the same with the summative. And then there's the other evidence, that's things you already do. You participate in a PLC, there are minutes, there are lesson plans, there might be other lesson planning documents that you use. Then there's the other regularly submitted evidence. So when grades are due, did you put your grades in on time? Are you getting attendance done? That's about that accurate record keeping. Now, you don't have to submit a laminated lesson plan that's perfect. No, you submit your regular lesson planning for your administrator to see. This is the kind of planning and preparation that I participate in on a daily, weekly basis. I mean, I know some people plan things out really far ahead. So when that evidence is collected, you can see her on the screen to the right, you see how it aligns to the components on the left. So again, we're gathering evidence to help define. When I look at setting instructional outcomes and I look at the rubric for 1C, I have all of this evidence to help me understand how it's going to be rated. So what did I see? Where is it on the rubric? And it removes that opinion, and it's just about the facts. So the first thing you and your administrator are going to do is you're going to set your observation date. Now, you have one before Christmas and after Christmas. Okay, now there are going to be lots of walkthroughs. This is the formal part of the evaluation. You're going to have a pre-conference. And within 5 days of the pre-conference, you're going to submit the pre-conference questions. So let's take a look at those. So find for me, please, your pre-conference questions. And this would be a good opportunity for you to take a look at those. Let's pause and take a look at the pre-conference questions. Now, you might see that there are classroom and non-classroom. Classroom are just for classroom teachers. Non-classroom is going to be for guidance counselors, media specialists, so you're answering one or the other, not both. So take a moment to read those. So when you've taken a look to read them, or read the questions rather, you'll notice that the purpose. So what's the purpose of these questions? Well, the purpose of the question would be is it sets the stage for instruction, right? It shows your administrator your planning and your preparation prior to their entry into the day's lesson. They can't crack open your skull and take a look and see what went on there to get us to this point that I'm going to see. So I have some questions that I need to have answered so I can really get some insight into what's going on up here. What got us to the day's lesson? Here's something to know, everybody. You're going to meet face-to-face with your administrator. Please don't write War and Peace. I'm going to speak for the administrator. They don't want you to spend that much time on it because they don't have the time to read a page per question. There are 5 questions. They don't want 5 pages of answers, okay? I know you want to communicate everything that you can, but try to keep it concise and brief because you're going to meet with them face-to-face. Now, you're going to answer these questions in AIM so that your administrator can see them prior to the pre-conference. When your administrator comes in for the observation, again, they're gathering evidence based on what they see and what they hear, based on mostly domains 2 and 3. But, really remember how we talked about you have the on stage and the off stage? They're going to know a lot of information about how you planned and prepared based on what they see in the classroom, so they can really gather evidence for domain 1 as well. So it all goes together. Don't be afraid. They'll probably ask your students questions because they want to know, what do the students know? What is the student experiencing? And how is this day different or the same as any other day that we have that's going on? Okay, so they're going to talk to the kids. Don't be alarmed. It's a part of the process. They're going to write or type evidence because, again, it's about what I saw, what I heard. Now, we don't want them writing down every single thing that you say. We also don't want them recording it, only because we want them to have opportunities to experience the classroom. Okay, and while we're experiencing the classroom, we want them to jot some things down so they have some examples. But sometimes when you're writing too furiously, you forget what's going on in the room. Okay, and we just discourage recording, not because it's anything that we, don't want to have happen. It's just, I'm here. Let me live in the moment. I may not have the time later to go back and watch it. And then we start to kind of focus in too much on things. Let's experience the classroom. Let's take some notes. Okay. They'll stay at least 30 minutes. So you want them to, because you want them to kind of get an idea of how the beginning of the class goes and how it transitions to the rest of the class. And if something occurs, you want them to see your reaction to it and how you attend to the business at hand. So within 3 days of the observation, you're going to do the post-observation questions and take a look at those post-observation questions. And then what is the purpose of the post-observation questions? So when you take a look at those questions and you kind of think about what's the purpose, well, first of all, it's about reflection, right? Sometimes we are all so busy in the day-to-day, we don't take time to really sit down and think about the impact of the day's lesson. Now, if you're a middle school or high school teacher or you're elementary departmentalized, you do have opportunities to reflect because you have multiple times to teach the lesson. Sometimes we need, though, that opportunity, a hard stop, so we can reflect on the lesson and give our administrator insight into how we use it to adjust instruction moving forward. Again, you're going to meet face-to-face. Don't write War and Peace on these when you're answering the questions. Be concise, be brief, capture the moment, but please don't submit 6 pages of responses. You don't have time for that, and your administrator doesn't either. I'm just speaking for them. Trust me. So how it all comes together. We have our rubric. Your administrator has come in, for example, and they have evidence around your questioning that you have. So we have gathered evidence around the questions. So we're going to sit down and we're going to decide, when I look at the kinds of questions and the types of student responses and the planning and preparation that went behind them, I'm going to see where it lands, where the questioning is on the rubric. And then the same thing occurs with the other 10 components. Then each one gets a rating. Then we put that on a rubric. We have a rubric for everything. We put it on the rubric. So in order to receive, for example, highly effective, it says at least 75% are at level 3 and or level 2. Level 3 is highly effective. Level 2 is effective. That's its numerical value. 0 at level 0. Well, what does that mean? That means you can have 9 that are highly effective or effective, 2 needs improvement developing, and 0 can be unsatisfactory. That would be for an effective rating. Notice unsatisfactory. And I want to point this one out because it can be a little tricky for people. It's not based on the number of something that you have. So if you have more highly effectives, you can have highly effective, but there are some rules that go along with it. Even if you have 9 highly effectives and 1 unsatisfactory, that does not equal highly effective, because you'll notice you can't have any unsatisfactories or needs improvement in order to be rated highly effective. And it doesn't matter if you have 10 highly effectives and 1 unsatisfactory, that is not highly effective. So for unsatisfactory, it's greater than are equal to 50% at level 1 and or level 0. So say, for example, you had 6 needs improvements and 5 highly effectives. That's not an average. The rule is if you have more of the 11 are needs improvement or unsatisfactory, the rating for instructional practice is then unsatisfactory. So it's rules, it's not number. Like the more you have of something, the more that you're more likely to be that rating. It's a rule that you have to follow, okay? So let's take a look at the deliberate practice. Now, when we as an oversight committee were deciding what we wanted to do as far as the deliberate practice, we said, well, what do we already do? What is something that's important for us to make sure that we tap into and we recognize that people are working? And what kind of is something that we can use to affect our practice? And we thought, you know what, we're doing PLCs. And if we think about what PLCs do, they work collaboratively and recurring cycles in order to achieve better results for the students they serve. That is action research. That is something where it's goal setting. There are steps that we must take, and we can know, how did we do towards our goal? So it's then something we can derive a rating on. That is why 34% of the evaluation is based on the deliberate practice. So you know that this is the process of PLCs. We set goals. What is something we want to improve upon? What do we want to deliberately practice? We collaborate on that goal. We apply new teaching strategies, and then we monitor and reflect upon our work. How did it go? How's it working? That is the process of the PLC. If you are doing the process of the PLC, the deliberate practice is natural. It is not deliberate practice first, PLC second. If you're doing the work of the PLC, the deliberate practice is a natural byproduct, okay? PLC first, DP next. So you have a handout that is about the deliberate practice, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because you do this with your PLC. So you and your PLC are going to collaborate on this whole process. You've already done step 1, and step 1 is identify your primary PLC. If you're a high school teacher, for example, and you might have multiple preps, your administrator is going to help you identify a primary PLC with which to work. Does that mean that that's the only group you ever work with because that's how you're going to use for your DP? Absolutely not, because you might have to have other conversations with other people, and that's a part of the rubric, which we'll talk about last, but you have a primary PLC. You and your PLC are going to work together, and you're going to set goals. You're going to have a goal. Now, the goal must be numeric. It's what do we want to achieve as a group? Now, you can use MAP. Just be careful. It might not be done by the reflection periods when we have those listed. You can use common assessment data. There might be other progress monitoring data that you have access to. And it may or may not be assessment data. If you are a PBIS school and you're on the PBIS PLC because you've been tasked with improving the attendance at your high school, well, you might not use assessment data. You might use attendance data. You might use discipline data to help guide your PLC's work. And it's also going to be based on your PLC's journey. So there may be student data, there may be PLC data, there may be other kind of assessment or non-assessment data. Lots of opportunities for goal setting. You're going to also talk about your gains. What do you want to learn? So in my example earlier, if I'm on the PBIS team at a high school, you might be struggling with, how are we going to motivate our high school students to come to school? In our particular area, we're losing some students who have the allure of going and working and making probably some really good money now versus a high school education. How do we educate ourselves in order to educate the students to know, okay, we get the allure of the money, but you have this work over here that if you get this, it's better for you in the long run. How do we communicate that? What do we say to them? My PLC might need to learn. We might need to read. We might need to Talk to some people to understand how do we motivate high school students with this kind of situation. So that's professional development that we might need. There might be individual professional development needs that need to be written in there that might be different than everybody else. Something that I might need to do that might be different than my PLC. So that's where you're going to capture that. You're also going to capture your barriers. Now, everybody, barriers is not an opportunity for us to be yes, but, no, because. It is yes, and yes, time is a barrier, for example, and what are we going to do about it? If my PLC and I meet formally 45 minutes a week or during our class periods, whatever our time frame might be, we might have to decide, okay, we only have this much time. How are we going to take advantage of it? What are we going to do? So yes, time is a barrier, and in order to make sure that it is not something, it's something we can think through, we're going to come prepared, we're going to have our data, we're going to be on time, we're going to leave on time. We set up norms and we set up guidelines for ourselves in order to address that barrier. So don't go on ad nauseum about it, because it's about the yes and, it's not about the no because. You and your team are going to create action steps. So how are we going to reach this goal? What are we going to do? They're not carved in stone. They might have to be amended, and that's okay. You do want to monitor them and adjust them as necessary, and be mindful of your due dates. You're going to want to take a look at your timeline and decide, okay, we have in January a reflection due. We might need to make sure we look at our data before the reflection is due. And some things may not have a due date. It may be a process or a procedure that we want to make sure we write in our action steps, and it might be ongoing. And that's okay. Step 4, do the work. That's the biggest part of a PLC, is actually doing what we said we were going to do. We're going to apply those new teaching strategies. We're going to reflect on it. And, I know some PLCs that reflect daily. They kind of come together at, because it's important to them as teachers to reflect with the other members of their team. And they just kind of gather, talk about the day, and then disperse. Formally, everybody is going to reflect twice a year, and that's everybody. That's all category teachers, it's administrators like me, it's school-based administrator. Everybody reflects twice a year, and those due dates are listed on your timeline. But here's the thing, you can reflect as a group, and then you can use that information to help you write your own personal reflection. You do not have to copy and paste as a group, because everybody's learning is going to be a little different, but you can use your conversations to help get you going on what you're going to say. Your administrator is then going to have been in your PLC, they're going to have seen your PLC minutes, they're going to view your reflection, and they're going to use all of that evidence to give you a rating on your deliberate practice. So let's take a look at effective. Effective is the individual, notice individual, participates in data analysis. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, if I say we're going to bring in, or our PLC is going to bring in common assessment data, or we're going to talk about our FSA data, and that means I got to talk about my data, and I've got to participate in everybody else as we analyze it. That can be a little personal, so we make sure that then we are participating appropriately with our group in the data analysis. But notice, everybody participates. The adjustment to my instruction, my practice, it might be inconsistent, because change is hard. And if it's something that's a new strategy that either I'm not comfortable with, or it's kind of clunky the first couple times I try it, it's like I'm kind of inconsistent, because change is hard, but I'm working towards a change. That change may be inconsistent. Now, this next one you'll notice is effective is everybody does their part. This was important to the oversight committee, that effective be at least everybody fulfills their action step responsibilities, their due dates, and they contribute to the discussions. And if you are the facilitator, or you're taking turns like facilitating the meeting, then you do your part. It was important to the oversight committee that it be conveyed to everyone that a part of being an effective team member is you are doing your part and fulfilling your responsibilities as the team has discussed. The final one would be is that we collaborate with others outside the PLC. It is very easy for us as educators. It's so easy because inherently we're in a classroom, we close the door for it to become a silo. So it's important that we open the door and we take opportunities. Sometimes they're formal, sometimes they're informal, to collaborate with others so that we're learning from each other, that we are making the best use of our resources. Because if we don't collaborate, we either are duplicating resources or we have a gap. And we want to make sure that we're doing neither, because both of them can take up resources that we don't have. And we have very limited resources of time, actual resources. So collaborating helps make sure we're getting the best return on our investment as possible. And part of that investment is your time. And we want to make sure we use that the best that we possibly can. So the last portion of the evaluation is the student performance, which is either going to be growth or achievement. So if you are a brand new teacher, you're a category 1, 2, this is important. I want you to find your timeline, okay? If you're new and we're past this timeline, it's still important. You still have to do this. You have to do what's called an SPO. That is a student performance objective. So what does that mean? Well, just like it says, it is a student goal that you and your administrator are going to set, and it has a due date in January. So if you're a late hire, there's going to be a later due date. But it's a goal you're going to set, you're going to work on that goal, and you're going to decide, did I meet it or did I not? So what kind of data can you use? You can use MAP, as long as you're going to have it tested and finished, and you're going to have a portion at January that'll be done. You can use student grades. You can use common assessment data. It just has to be student data that you target for a decrease or an increase, okay? And again, timely and the SMART data concept is it has to be in time for the January due date. So here's an example of somebody who set it based on student grades, which you can definitely do. This one happened to be about MAP, and it was very specific to some individual students in order to kind of tap into maybe remediation that was being done with these students. This one happens to be, it was a non-classroom teacher who wanted to kind of affect the students who were, that had a possibility for a 504 plan. Here's the thing you have to remember. The rubric for the SPO is as follows: exceeded the goal, met the goal, did not meet the goal, did not attempt. You and your administrator have to monitor your progress on the goal and make adjustments as necessary. If you were too ambitious when you first set it and you realize it was too ambitious, it's formative, set it, it's okay. You can adjust it, it's okay. All right, just you want to make sure you don't get to January and your administrator realizes you didn't adjust it and you didn't meet it. And so because it's formative, it's okay if it needs improvement or unsatisfactory, but that also conveys to the administrator it wasn't monitored. And it's important that it be monitored, because highly effective is exceeds, effective is meets. All right, and it's totally in your hands, you and your administrators, to set and monitor and adjust as necessary. Okay. Now, when we talk about the summative portion of the student performance, this comes from test data. So you can see to the left the variety of testing that we use in our teachers' evaluations, as well as on the right. The left is more things that are like state assessments. The right are more of approved measurements that we use in evaluations. Now, notice in the red that I have highlighted where a VAM comes from. VAM, that's a value added model about value added measurement. Not everybody has a VAM, okay? Everybody has a student performance piece. Some people have a VAM. And I like to be sure that I clarify that, because the number one question people say is, well, what's my VAM? Well, I don't know. Let me find out if you have a VAM. You might have another measurement. All right. Now, the VAM comes from FSA data and Algebra 1 data. Everybody else doesn't have a VAM. So what is a VAM? Well, a VAM is a value-added model, and I do like to clarify for people, it's not about learning gains, it's not about school grades, okay? It's something different. Same data, different handling of the data. It uses a student's prior test scores and other measured characteristics to predict their student achievement. It compares a student's success to other students like them to create this predicted score, and this predicted score is compared to their actual score. Okay, I'm going to continue to explain that, so don't be alarmed. So school grade says, where are students on the mountain? If this is the mountain, where are they on it? It's kind of like if this is the bar, where are the students in relation to the bar? Are they at it, above it? Are they growing towards it? Did they grow a certain amount? There's always a bar, okay? And value added, it's not really about the mountain. It's where are students as compared to other students. And I know I like science fiction movies. It's kind of like The Matrix. There was a bar over here. On this side, there is no bar. In The Matrix, there was no spoon. Okay, there is no bar. It's not about the bar. It's how did students grow compared to other like students. So what are some of those characteristics? Well, how are the students identified to be in these groups? The biggest way to predict a student's success is what was their past success. So those are two indicators, but there's more than that because there's a lot that goes into student success. These are the data points that we do capture. The difference in modal age is, have they been retained or not? Have they been accelerated or promoted? What's their attendance? What's their specific learning disability? Are they ELL? The homogeneity of class just means within the class, how similar are the students in the class? If you think about it, if a group of students are very dissimilar, you might have an inclusion classroom with a lot, like you have level 1 learners with level 5 learners in there, level 4 learners, level 3 learners. So you have all of these different learners in the classroom. If they're that varied, then you're going to have, let's just say theoretically, the teacher's going to have to work that much harder to attend to all of the learning. If I have a classroom of students who are all very similar, they're all, let's just say level 3 students, well, theoretically, then their needs, theoretically, are very similar. Just statistically talking, if you will. Notice mobility is included in here, and there are all of these other characteristics that we capture as well. So what does it mean, everybody? Let me give you this. This is an example I like to use. If there's a student like Dawn, and Dawn has 90 days present. So across the state of Florida, there's a group of students who have 90 days present that were reported to the state. Now, Dawn's in this group. Okay, here's the group that Dawn's a part of 90 days present. And after the test is taken, after the FSA is taken, it says, okay, here's that group of students with 90 days present. How did this group do on the test? The day of the test, how did they do? How did they perform on the test? Now remember, Dawn's in here. So now let's take Dawn out of the group. Now, Dawn was just in the group for days present. This is how the group did on the test. Did Dawn go equal with that group? Was she above it? Was she below it? Okay, now maybe Dawn's also an ELL student. So I've got all the ELL students that Dawn's a part of that group. Remember, here's Dawn. How did those ELL students across the state of Florida do on the test the day of the test? Now let's take Dawn out. Did she do equal to the group of which she is a part, above or below? And we take all of those characteristics to define, did the student meet their predicted score or not? That's what we're ultimately getting to when we have a value added score. Now, when we get the data, we get a raw score, but we also get a standard of error. And that standard of error comes from those characteristics that help define what is a teacher, for instance, if it's that varied classroom, that K-3 classroom, when we have big standards of error, it's because we have some characteristics that we're trying to define. What's the probability that that raw score is accurate? And sometimes we can have very big characteristics, and we have very big standards of error. Okay, so when we get that information, we then apply it to our rubric. The state has its own rubric. We have our rubric, and the rubric is what you see here. Okay. We also provide to teachers the state rubric because it's important for you to know what the state's definition of the raw score is and what their handling of the data has derived. But we also give you our rating, and sometimes they're different. So we want you to know that. So student performance is going to be based on the courses that you teach. If you teach an FSA course or Algebra 1, that includes grades 8, then you receive a VAM score. If you teach students who do not take an FSA course, they don't take a state assessment, it wasn't listed on one of the district assessments, then you receive an indirect rating based on how your students do on the FSA reading. Because remember, everybody has to have a measurement based on the students they serve. Okay, so we have to make sure that we give that to everybody in the best way possible. All right, and just remember, VAM is one kind of measurement. Not everybody has a VAM. So each one of our measurements has a rubric, and all of these are listed in your manual, which is available on the intranet. And each one of these derives a rating. Now, here's one thing I want to pause on. If you have, for instance, you teach 4 sections of American history and 1 section of civics, your evaluation is going to be weighted based on how many students are in that measurement. So in this case, the American history would have more weight than the civics because there's more students in American history. So that's going to be true of any of the measurements. Wherever the weight is, wherever there's more students, that's going to have more weight in the measurement. Now, let's kind of summarize. You had your instructional practice rating. We gathered evidence there and we rated the 11 components, which came through a rubric, so we get a rating for the instructional practice. In this case, it was effective. That's a numerical value of 2. We multiply 2 times its percentage, which would be 33%, for a value of 0.66. Then we had the deliberate practice. In this case, the person did everything they were asked. They were highly participatory. They got out of their silo. They fulfilled their action steps. They were highly effective in their deliberate practice. So that was a value of 3. So 3 times 34% is a 1.02. In this particular example, student performance was effective by the time that all the pieces came in. So that is a 2 times 33% for a value of 0.66. When we add that together, remember I told you there was a rubric for everything. We have a value of 2.34, and we put that on the final rubric to determine, is the practice highly effective, or is the entire practice, the evaluation, highly effective, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. So you can see a 2.34 does not meet the rule for highly effective, but it exceeds the rule for effective. So in this case, the rating would be effective for this particular example. Now remember I said there's a rubric for everything, and all of this is listed in your evaluation manual. Now, I know that's a lot. Just gave you a lot of information. Here's what I want you to focus on first if you're new to Bay District Schools. The very first thing you need to do is your self-assessment. Your self-assessment is available in Ains. And the purpose of the self-assessment has a couple different things that you can do. Number one, you want to make sure your category is correct. Category 1 are people who are in their first or second year of teaching. I'm going to skip category 2. Category 3 is going to be for those teachers who are in their 3rd to 9th year of teaching, continual contracts with Bay District Schools. Category 4 is going to be those teachers with 10 plus years of continual experience with Bay District Schools. Category 2, that's a special category, and it's based on those who have a break in service. You might have 20 years of experience in Nevada, but if you just moved here, you're new to Bay District Schools. So you're new to our system, you're category 2. If you were teaching here last year, but your contract, you didn't get renewed, and your contract was not picked up till July 7th, you have a break in service, you're a category 2. So the self-assessment is a good chance for you to look to see what category am I. Another good thing for doing your self-assessment is you get a chance to kind of Be familiar with the rubric with which you are going to be evaluated. Okay, self-assessment first. The second thing I want you to note is that SPO. Now, if you are a late hire to Bay District Schools, welcome. We're going to give you time to take care of this, and your administrator and you are going to contact me to let me know that you're a new late hire and what are the deadlines that we need to set for that. That's the first two things that you need to know right now. The rest of this is going to come with time. I'm going to work with you and your administrator is going to work with you. Again, what was our purpose at the beginning? We want to get down here to the very end, and we want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable, that you feel like your evaluation has been done with fidelity, you have been given feedback, and you understand the ratings that have been given, why they were given, and how you can use that information to be even better. So that's the goal. And that's always my hope for the evaluation system. Again, my name is Dawn Capes. These are where the resources are, my email, my phone number. Please feel free to reach out to me or to your administrator if you have questions about your evaluation. Again, we are all in this together. It takes everybody to get down to this bottom point and make sure that it's all correct and it has the fidelity that it needs. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to Bay District Schools. I hope you have a great school year.